Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2007 buddy comedy movie titled I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry. Now, I know Pronounce You Chuck and Larry runs for 1 hour and 55 minutes long, and I think that for a comedy of this caliber, it should have been downsized to maybe an hour and a half to maybe an hour and 35 at the latest. An hour and 55 minutes for the movie of this caliber, way too long. But we'll get more into that. It is directed by Dennis Dugan. It is produced by Adam Sandler, Jack Giaraputo, Tom Shadyac, and Michael Bostick. The script was written by Barry Fanaro, Alexander Payne, and Jim Taylor. It was composed by Rupert Gregson Williams, the cinematography by Dean Semler, and it was edited by Jeff Gowerson. And the stars of the movie are Adam Sandler, Kevin James, Jessica Biel, Steve Buschemi, Ving Rhames, Dan Ackroyd, Peter Dante, Nicholas Turturro, Rachel Dratch, Alan Covert, Richard Chamberlain, Nick Swardson, John Farley, Lance Bass, Cole Morgen, Shelby Adamowsky, Mary Pat Gleason, Dave Matthews, Blake Clark, Dan Patrick, Tila Tequila, Jamie Chung, Dennis Dugan, Rob Corddry, Jonathan Loughran, Becky and Jesse O'Donoghue, Robert Smigel, David Spade, Rob Schneider, Arnie Starr, Jim Ford, and Michael Marcanio. Alright, well listen here. I made the efforts to make it through this movie. I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry. And being that it's an Adam Sandler movie and the target audience that the film caters through is towards the male teens and young adults who just haven't yet evolved in their intellectual level. And sure, I found, and to make no mistake about it, I'm not an Adam Sandler snob. I used to like his earlier material like Happy Gilmore and Billy Madison, and maybe even possibly The Water Boy as a sign of a guilty pleasure. But, like I said, the movies like Happy Gilmore and Billy Madison, well, they were definitely quite entertaining. But since then, he has failed to meet the same expectations from his later films because in the end, he just ends up typecasting himself in the same roles over and over again. It's practically the same character with a different name. That's how I usually get the impression whenever I watch an Adam Sandler movie. And though I must say, actually, Click was quite funny. But even that was kind of passed off more as a guilty pleasure than an actual cinematic masterpiece to Marvel act. So coming into I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry, my hopes and my expectations were pretty much at the lower end of the bar. But I guess I gave it a shot, knowing fully well what I was getting myself into. Anything real? Of course not. Is there anything that's logical? Highly unlikely. But then again, this is an Adam Sandler movie, so logic is pretty much thrown out the window. Common sense and humanity issues, well, you could throw that out as well. Because, news for you people, you won't see it. So the story goes a little bit something like this. Adam Sandler and co-star Kevin James, respectively, are Chuck Levine and Larry Valentine. They are firefighters who work for the Fire Department of New York, or the FDNY. And just to throw it in, these two guys are actually heterosexuals. I know I have to bring it up, but there's a reason why I had to actually say that. Alright, so Larry's wife sadly passed away, and now he is left raising his two children, while Chuck, on the other hand, is single, and he also has continual sex with other women. Now, the thing is that this is where the dramatic side of the story is. You see, Larry, because of the fact that he has a very dangerous job, and now he has to raise his two kids on his own, well, because he's a firefighter, and because you never know that even though his wife died prematurely, there's also a greater chance that he could be following in her footsteps too. Just knowing the circumstances he's facing, being that he's a firefighter and that you're pretty much putting your life on the line through every time you put out a fire. In fact, he has come on many close occasions. But, Chuck always has his back. But still, Larry, if precaution is not taken with the wind, well, chances are he could probably end up succumbing to an early grave, just like his deceased wife. And then what? What's going to be of the kids? So he can't be granted pension for his kids unless he himself gets married. But since he's got nobody else out there, he decides to ask Chuck to be his faux husband and to watch over his kids if he should ever die in duty. Like, he wants to pass the responsibilities to Chuck if he should go. But then you'll also have to kind of ask yourself, where's the logic to that? I mean, Chuck is also a firefighter, and he could also perish as well. So then what? Drop your kids off to grandma's and let them become permanent residents there? That could have been the other alternative. But, let's face it, there isn't really much logic to this story. So, but I guess I'll just take it like a grain of salt. So, Chuck and Larry are now practically faux husbands, looking after the kids while also trying to rescue people from burning buildings and to take out whatever fires that's happening in NYC. Things take a slight hiccup when their legitimacy starts to come into question. This is where they hire an attorney named Alexa McDonough, played by Jessica Biel, who just happens to have the same first name, last name as a former Canadian NDP leader. That's true. She just happened, and just by coincidence, this Alexa McDonough lawyer also happens to be quite beautiful. And being the womanizer that Chuck is, Chuck likes her not for her intelligence or dedication, but basically through her looks. Though he tries to conceal it every way he can because, because A, he wants to take her seriously, even though he just only loves her for her looks, and B, because he's doing a favor for Larry by pretending to be gay. But not only that, the duo definitely have to also go through all the other nuptials as well. So then Chuck and Larry eventually travel to Canada and are legally wed. This leads to home insurance investigator Clinton Fitzer, played by Steve Buschemi, to watch their every step along the way. So Chuck shacks up with Larry and the kids, And before long, the guys at the fire department eventually start mocking at them with homophobic slurs and close by neighbors. So this movie is definitely not for the faint at heart. If okay, here's the thing. If you happen to be, homosexual, there you will actually unfortunately find a lot of offensive language in this movie. This is also might be par for the course because of the fact that this movie came out in 2007, where it was a little more lenient to poke fun at homosexuals and exploit all the stereotypes that come with being homosexual. But in the end, I want to tell you something. The movie is not as homophobic as you may expect it to be. It may sound like it's homophobic, but really, to tell you the truth, it actually has a message against homophobia in the end. So, underneath all the rough patches with all the homophobic slurs, and yes, the use of, unfortunately, I have to use this word, but I have, but it does happen in this movie. But yeah, they do use the word, the the homophobic F word in this movie, unfortunately. And if you don't feel comfortable with watching that, well, guess what? 3 simple words. And I'm gonna use the whole wide-eye growl. Don't watch it! Easy as that. But if you do feel offended by it, don't be. Because it's a misnomer to think that this movie is blatantly homophobic. It actually tells you an anti-homophobic message behind all the homophobic slurs that is utilized in this movie. In fact, this movie is not just homophobic, there's also some levels of racism and misogyny as well. But then again, this was, used quite heavily at the time. This was in 2007 when people were not so easily offended. They were offended, but not to the excess where it won't be greenlit. It's probably not going to be greenlit by today's standards because of our modern day sensitivities. But back in 2007, when we weren't so overly sensitive, you will find a lot of this material and content in there too. But that's not actually the most irksome thing in this movie. There's a lot of other irksome things in this movie aside from the homophobia. So once again, Adam Sandler is at it again, playing his trademark man-child character, spewing off homophobic, sexist, and playground humor at every chance he gets. And though at times his lines are funny, there are also times when he can be kind of a jerk. And the sad part is that Adam Sandler has done this same type of role for almost 30 years. So he can actually perform this kind of act sleepwalking, and he's really just doing it to cater to his fan base, who, like I said, are teenagers and young adults who probably have a shortened reading, who have a short reading age. By way of contrast, Kevin James, on the other hand, definitely plays off the more kind-spirited, lovable character who definitely plays the straight act to this comedy duo. Just like Sandler, Kevin James seems to play this same type of role time and time again with really nothing new to offer. And while Jessica Biel maybe eye candy to the male demographics, especially to Adam Sandler. I gotta actually say that she probably turned in maybe one of the best performances in this movie. She definitely proves that she can be more than just window dressing. Her comedic timing is just as spot on as her male co stars, and her character is intelligent, sweet, and definitely dedicated to her work ethic. She is definitely the glue that kind of brings this movie together. It's just kind of a shame that the other supporting actors and actresses just don't seem to measure up very well. It's a shame that Dan Ackroyd really has little to do except churn in a few one-liners and just plays the role as the fire chief. Really very little to do in this movie. Ving Rhames actually does especially well, making a parody to the roles he's played in the past. You know, he comes off as this big, scary individual, but then when Chuck and Larry are, acting as faux, faux husbands, well, he actually eventually opens up to them and actually says that at least finally I don't have to pretend to be something that I'm not. And thanks to you guys, I can now open up about myself. You know. And as for Steve Buschemi, his creepy character role, though familiar, was highly entertaining. Although I just can't see any other role that he has played anything better than his performance in Fargo. But then again, that's actually a very tough act to follow. But Steve Buscemi definitely kind of plays the antagonistic role very, very convincingly, even though it's pretty much played for caricature. There are a few other small roles here. I do not really like David Spade's character as this flaunt, as he just sort of plays off, like the flirty, flaunting, flamboyant transvestite, because to me he's just playing off a silly, goofy character who's like, "Oh, I'm a guy, I'm wearing a dress," type of nonsense. If he was never even put in the cast to begin with, it probably would never have made a difference because his role is just way too ridiculous, even for a satirical comedy like this one. That's a little overkill. And maybe his role could probably be far more offensive than the Chuck and Larry faux gay partner type movie that we're seeing here. Written by Alexander Payne along with Barry Fanaro and Jim Taylor. Here's where our big weakness here in this movie is: why can't they just depend on just one writer? Why do they have to have three? Just so they could cram as much of their information, as much as their ideas in, just so that nobody can be offended or hurt? Well, I'm sorry. The game goes in movies is that we should just depend on one script. And if the other two don't like it, well, they can just simply go play in traffic. But other than that, the script overall is immature, incoherent, and awkward. With the reputation they have as veteran writers, you would think they could have wrote something with a little more sophistication to it. But they said, fuck sophistication. We're gonna write as much nonsense as ever. Most of the people who go see Adam Sandler movies have IQs equivalent to room temperature. So we'll just we'll just write something that is synonymous to their intellectual levels. So instead, they just lower their standards and used recycled jokes and an archaic use of gags that were more templates back in the 80s. Because a lot of this movie has a lot of 80s mindsets to it. I mean, most of the homophobic innuendos in this movie were vintage 80s, back at the time when LGBTQ people were basically the primary target in the 80s, because of the whole AIDS epidemic thing and the whole negative stereotypes about. So, this is pretty much out of date humor here. I mean, even in 2007, people have learned to become more accepting. You know, but still, taken from a guilty pleasure aspect, I will give kudos to Adam Sandler and Kevin James. They definitely do have a great chemistry, and they are definitely great as a comedic duo. Even if sometimes the humor depicted in this movie is just very ill timed. I mean, I remember one time they were doing some kind of fire rescue. They were on the job trying to put out a fire, but unfortunately, there was a guy who was trapped in a fire. But he wasn't just some ordinary guy who was trapped in a fire. It was a big, heavy set, 600-pound guy who was permanently bedridden because he just couldn't get out of bed and he was trapped in a fire. So, Chuck and Larry tried to save the guy. They managed to take him down the stairs, and then, he comes out saying, "I'm coming to you, Mama." And then he runs so fast, and then he falls on the ground. He lands on top of Chuck, and then he ends up, letting out a big fart, which ignited more flames. And even though I have to admit, in a slightly awkward disposition, I do have to even admit that was a little bit funny. But it's just the way it looked was funny. But the reality was it's not that funny. And then Chuck and Larry end up laughing when really they shouldn't be laughing because a guy's life is in danger. Regardless of the fact that he was 600 pounds, permanently bedridden, and then he let out a big blast of air through the old sphincter trumpet. I mean, there's just a lot of exasperating scenes in this movie that is pretty much forgettable material most of the time. But still, I guess if you're into screwball comedies like this one, this might be for you. Or if you just love surreal immaturity like you see in this movie, who's me to stop you? I mean, I'm not gonna say this was the worst movie I've ever seen. Far from a masterpiece. A lot of flaws, a lot of illogical stuff, a lot of stuff that's actually quite offensive. But still, I'm not gonna say it's the worst thing I've ever seen. I've seen a lot worse. I sat through a lot of garbage. I sat through a lot of bullshit. This one was bullshit. But it was one of those maybe bullshit, but still enjoyable. Under the direction of Dennis Dugan, who has collaborated with Adam Sandler many times before, decides to take a more sophomoric route this time. Though it may not be entirely as offensive as everybody thinks, the direction adds very little in terms of originality. The whole "don't drop the soap in the male showers" trope has been quite tiring. I mean, I've seen So many don't drop the soap in the male showers routine so many times. It just makes me sick. Seeing that trope is just like, do we have to have that injected into this movie or in any movies in particular? I saw it in the prison scene in the Naked Gun movies, and even though that was funny back then, it's just not funny anymore. So, uh, make like a pair of scissors in the snow and just cut it out. Thank you. And though lampooning the stereotypes of all walks of life can be funny, it becomes more out there and less nuanced. There is no subtlety in this movie, but then again, it's an Adam Sandler's movie, so subtlety and nuance will not be seen. You want subtlety and nuance? Go watch a tearjerker drama. If you're gonna go to tears of laughter. So this movie's main target, we get tired of the portrayals of gays being effeminate and flamboyant, and women being just eye candy, and the straight dudes being fumbling morons. Yes, the stereotypes come to life here. Gays being effeminate and flamboyant, women being on just for window dressing, and straight dudes being just a bunch of bumbling idiots. But if these jokes carry on in its entirety, it actually becomes one note and really, really fucking irritating. Sure, every so often they soften the blows with the whole gay people should never be judged for who they are, but then it only gets mentioned here and there and is pretty much just reduced to an afterthought because we don't want no moral messages in an Adam Sandler movie. We just want some immature fun in the end of all. But it does become tedious, monotonous, and wanton in its intentions. The idea is to find gross out intentions of two guys kissing is centered around to make the teenage audience laugh, but older people will find shameful that they try to take this male bonding as a joke when really it could be definitely a sign of gay acceptance. I mean, they could take a thing and use some moral fibers into this movie, but instead they decided to go with this whole, ew, that's gross, and just add some playground humor to it. For those of you who don't know what playground humor is, it's, when kids hang out outside, they're in their own little gangs or little cliques, and they spend pretty much 10 or 20 minutes spewing off senseless, childish, immature insults. Like the whole, oh, your face is so ugly, your mother tied a pork chop around your neck so the dog could play with you, type of thing. Or you're so stupid, the only way to raise your IQ is to stand on a chair. Oh, wait, it's the power of three. I gotta go with a third one. As the rules of power of three, I have to have a third one. Okay, how about this one? When you were born and your mother looked at your face, she saw your face and she saw your ass and she says, "Good God, Siamese twins." There. There you go. There's your third one. So aside from the immature, sexist, and homophobia this movie has injected in this movie, hey, let's throw in racism to join in the party of discrimination as well. Sure, why not? We have we have immaturity, we have sexism, we have homophobia. Let's put in some good old late 2000s racism. Sure, there's some badly stereotyped performance from an uncredited Rob Schneider who shouldn't be credited in any movies, period. As he plays off the role as a Japanese Canadian minister who is presuming a gay Jewish wedding, even though I don't know if Larry Valentine himself is Jewish, but even though we know Chuck Levine is. Anyhow, yes, Rob Schneider is playing off the racism game as a Japanese Canadian minister. Now I understand what you're saying. What's all racist about that? Isn't Rob Schneider half Asian? Be that as it may, yes. Sure, Rob Schneider has some Asian extraction in him. No, not Japanese. Was his mother's Filipino and his father's Jewish, but still, nonetheless, there was no need to make his accent that strong. If he's Japanese Canadian, he should just speak with pretty much a more almost like a standard Canadian accent, eh? Yes, he says, and he should, instead of saying sorry, he should say sorry. No, even that's stereotyping, but still, nonetheless, a lot of Asian Canadians speak with more regular voices, with maybe a slight accent, and not some over the top squinty eye type of accent. It's not over the top. I mean, he took it to great extremities. And while, yeah, okay, Rob Schneider is half Filipino, that does not necessarily give him an excuse to go into overkill with the Japanese Canadian minister and his over the top accent to make it look too goofy. Yeah, I know it's slapstick, but even that was taken to extremities. And most Asian Canadians talk with North American accents anyway. It's stuff like that is what annoyed me the most. You may think you're playing it off for laughs, but you're mostly playing it off for cringe. I came here for a good laugh or two. I didn't come to this movie to get pissed off. This movie doesn't go for any dares. Most of the performers, especially the leads, are pretty much playing typecast. The jokes have practically been done to death, and the sensitive moments are in the background, being that it's an Adam Sandler movie. And sure, it might not be serious as in Brokeback Mountain, I still would have been satisfied in the end if either Chuck or Larry really were gay. You know, that probably would have been a decent ending when they actually really did discover that they actually were more than just buddies. I would have been okay with that. Instead, they decided to leave out the moral premise and chose the path of playground humor with more insults. Like, your mother's so fat, well, when she walked into a McDonald's store with a purple dress, all the kids mistook her for Grimace. You're so ugly, when you look in the mirror, the reflection runs away. You are so stupid. How stupid are you? You're so stupid, you're the only person I know who tried to put a tire on an army tank. Jerry the King Lawler, you're a genius. At best, this film, in the end, was nothing more than just a guilty pleasure. But in the end, I know I said a lot of negative things in this movie, and I doused you with a spoonful of sarcasm throughout. But then again, what am I supposed to do? This is an Adam Sandler movie, so I'm supposed to be playing off the smarmy, sarcastic thing. And even though I've said a lot of of playground humor myself, because this is the kind of bullshit I put up with when I was in school with these jokes. We all said these witty banters a lot of times. Still, that's the kind of jokes you would expect in this movie. Would I recommend this movie? Well, I don't know. I had mixed feelings really about this movie at all. I mean, sure, I know it tries its best to spread a moral message of people should love and accept people for who they are. And even though they do say that message there, it's pretty much only just a standard statement and not actually, going around the lines like trying to demonstrate it. Instead, they decided to just go the path of being senseless, immature, and offensive. And even though, yes, this movie was made in 2007, this movie would not be given the green light in 2021 standards. But at best, this movie only is just a guilty pleasure. Because, I did have a few laughs. I was never bored, even though the movie took too long. I'm not going to say it's the worst movie I've ever seen, but it's still not the best either. I came in with low expectations, and the low expectations is pretty legit. But at least it's honest that it has low expectations, and I was expecting low expectations. So for that, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry a 6. And maybe even that I might be being too generous. But hey, I'm a nice guy. What can you say? But the only thing I gotta say is, so I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. And if you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Corddry saying, keep watching those movies, and I will see you around. Goodbye.